Hey, wait a second, that means I gotta make it.
Okay, we'll let Tom here. All right, let's call the meeting to order of the Hopkinton Budget Committee, December 8th, 2021. Thank you all. And let's start with the pledge. And Don, would you do the pledge?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we've got some minutes from November 10th, 2021. If someone would make a motion.
Second.
All right, Ken moved and Jonathan seconded. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Questions, clarifications? Great, all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Wonderful. Okay, tonight I'm going to focus on the town's budget proposal, and it will be the Ken and Neil show. Take it away, gentlemen.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Looking to 2022, there are. Let's get set up for. Thanks. I thought you were on it already.
Ken's so excited, he's raring to go.
Get it over. I'll never let you. Looking to 2022, there are more unknowns beyond what the course of the pandemic will take. What will happen with the supply chain, inflation, utility costs, the availability of labor and outside contractors,
Hey, Mark.
and what, if any, additional funding will the town receive from the federal or state governments? With those uncertainties, let me start by.
Pardon me for a second. Sorry, I can't hear you. So.
I just need one of the last year's.
Got it. You think?
Oh,
Okay.
I only have the copies that were here.
I've
So
got a copy at home. I've got it here too.
Oh, thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Carry on.
Okay. With those uncertainties, let me start by thanking the many individuals involved in this budget process. I'll start with Neil and our department heads and staff, committee members, including yourselves, my fellow select board members, and the many wonderful volunteers in town for all of their hard work and dedication in helping develop this budget and helping to keep the town running as smoothly as it does. As you will hear in developing this budget, the select board has tried to balance the legitimate needs of the town while recognizing that many of our fellow citizens continue to be stressed financially due to the pandemic. So the budget process to date, the process we have followed this year, going back to August, the department heads started preparing their budgets with the guidance to just focus on needs, not wants, as much as possible. And as you will see later, they did an excellent job of that. Next, the department heads met with the town administrator to review their requests. Then the select board met with each department head to review and scrutinize their requests, including capital needs. Then the select board began the hard work of trying to balance town needs with affordability to our taxpayers, recognizing that the starting point was the department head's proposed increase of about 15%, which did not address the use of the fund balance or American Rescue Plan Act funds. The select board reduced the department head's operating budget request by $290,000. In reality, we didn't cut anywhere near that amount, but shifted $201,000 of the DPW budget request from being accounted for in the regular process to being recovered through funds provided to the town through the American Rescue Plan Act, which I will explain in detail later in this presentation. So the DPW budget request is fully funded just from two pots instead of one. The next biggest reduction relates to health insurance. The original estimate was for about a $62,000 increase over the 2021 budget amount. Since then, Neil and Deb have had meetings with our and other potential insurers and are now confident that the final number will be minimal increase or even a decrease versus last year's budget. By way of a sanity check and consistent with that expectation, I'm the treasurer of a large statewide nonprofit. And recently, the nonprofit received a quoted increase in their health insurance rates from their current provider for 2022 that was in the double digits. So we reached out to other insurers and have reached agreement with a different insurer, which results in a 1% decrease in costs and slightly better benefits for employees. Beyond that, the select board made numerous other reductions in the initial operating budget requests from the department heads to the clerk's office, legal, planning, utilities, cemeteries, police, and tax anticipation note. But there wasn't any amount above about $6,000. Those smaller changes are shown on pages 16 and 17 of your booklet, and I can address any of those if you wish. Now, starting to put everything together. On the revenue side, excluding funds from the American Rescue Plan Act, which I will address later, non-property tax revenues for 2022 are projected to increase by $131,000. Of the $131,000, $23,000 relates to sewer fund revenues, which are paid by users of the sewer system and the Kentucky Village Precinct, leaving an increase to true operating revenues of $107,000. The main drivers of the $107,000 on the positive side are $35,000 increase in motor vehicle permit fees. And as I do every year, I'll just ask people to buy new and bigger, more expensive vehicles. Also, ambulance charges, as well as Webster and Warner's share of the costs for such, resulting in an increase of $15,000. Webster's share of operating costs for the transfer station increasing $15,000. An increase in the transfer station tipping fees and recycling receipts totaling $29,000. The sale of tax deeded property of $100,000 relating to 8 properties whose property taxes haven't been paid in at least 3 years. These increases in revenues are offset by a projected decrease in room and meals payments from the state of $35,000, pay-by-bag revenues declining by $50,000, and a $10,000 decrease in interest and penalties on taxes. Going back to the pay-by-bag sales for a moment, they were, as you remember, they were suspended in 2020 for a while due to COVID, but the amount was carried as a receivable. So although bag sales have returned to normal in 2021, only a smaller amount is available to offset 2022 expenses. On the operating budget, the overall operating budget, including sewer expenses, shows an increase of $420,000 or 5.49%. Excluding sewer expenses, which are reimbursed by sewer users and the precinct, the result is $406,000. But let me be very clear that these numbers are misleading due to the use of the ARPA funds in the amount of $201,000, which we're using for roads and salt, as I noted previously, and will explain later in this presentation. So for the operating budget, the biggest increase by far is a $239,000 increase in debt costs due to the $1.8 million loan issued in 2021. I'll note that $239,000 by itself represents over a 4% increase in the town tax rate. Other large drivers are the annualization of the state's previously enacted increase in the town's portion of payments into the state retirement system, $41,000. The second and final payment to Fairpoint Communications related to settlement of a prior assessment lawsuit of almost $50,000. A 3.5% well-deserved merit increase for our town employees of $98,000, and a almost $20,000 increase for more hours for a code enforcement officer to cover the increased workload. This is partly offset by increased revenues from planning and zoning changes. Demolition tipping fees are increasing by $17,000, again offset by higher revenues from the transfer station. As an aside, often in prior years, the question has been asked about how much transfer station costs taxpayers for 2022, putting aside pay by bag. The net operating expense for Hopkinton is about $300,000. Getting back to the operating budget changes, road shimming and paving is decreasing by $143,000, but will be fully funded plus 5% through the ARPA funds, which again, I've already referred to and we'll discuss later. The town clerk tax collector's office will see a $12,000 increase, primarily due to a 8.48% increase in the wage level for the town clerk tax collector. As the wage level was set in 2019 and frozen for the length of the elected term for that position. This increase, which will be frozen for the next 3 years, basically keeps the percentage wage increase in line with non-elected town officials who received merit and cost of living increases in those prior 3 years. And also it's comparable to town clerk and tax collector wages in similar sized towns. Property liability insurance is expected to increase by $10,000 for our insurer Primex. Police overtime is increasing by $12,000 and assumes 12 hours per week of overtime on average over the year. The library budget is increasing by $15,000, with utility costs being the main drivers there. On the decrease side, with the retirement of our full-time human service administrator, we've replaced Marilyn with a part-time employee at a savings of $25,000. Okay, now, as I referred to, getting into the American Rescue Plan Act. The town expects to receive $603,000 from the American Rescue Plan Act. While the items we can expend the funds on are fairly broad, since per the federal formula, they're termed lost revenues, we have to expend the funds by 2024. Since we have 3 years to spend the funds, the select board has decided to spend about 1/3 in each of the next 3 years in an effort to levelize taxes. For 2022, we're applying the $201,000 to the DPW budget for shimming and paving, as well as to cover the projected significant increase in salt costs. With this amount, the DPW will receive its full budget request for 2022, which includes a 5% increase for shimming and paving and a $40,000 increase in salt costs. The total the select board is proposing to put into capital reserves and maintenance trust funds for 2022 is $792,000, broken down into $705,000 for the capital reserve fund, or $1,000 less than 2021, and $87,000 to expendable trust funds, or $14,500 more than 2021. In the CRF, the biggest amounts are $200,000 for the fire department, mainly for the replacement of the 20-year-old forestry truck, breathing apparatus, and rescue equipment. $200,000 also to the Public Works Department, mainly for the replacement of an 8-year-old small dump truck and a 7-year-old tractor. $80,000 to go into the ambulance CRF for the replacement of an 8-year-old ambulance in 2023. $65,000 to the transfer station CRF towards the replacement of 2 trailers. $25,000 to the police cruisers and accessories CRF to continue replacing vehicles as scheduled. $24,000 towards the townwide revaluation required every 5 years. $35,000 for a major sludge removal project currently planned for 2023. $50,000 to recreation for among other items, bathrooms at George Park in 2023. The biggest item in the maintenance trust funds is $60,000 to the town facilities maintenance trust, which will, with the addition of funds already in the fund, make $80,000 available for work at the Houston Barn. The board would also like to create a new capital reserve fund labeled Payroll Liability Trust Fund in the initial amount of $10,000. This would be used to pay for accrued payroll liabilities existing when an employee leaves or retires. This fund is recommended by our outside auditors and would have come in very handy in 2021 because we had several long tenured employees retire and we had to pay out over $100,000, the bulk of which went to our former police chief, Cora, due to his unique contract with the town. Normally, the payout to an employee is in the $6,000 range. Under individual warrant articles, this is the easy one. At this point, there are no individual warrant articles. Use of the fund balance. We're proposing to use $200,000 from the fund balance, which is a decrease of $131,000 compared to 2021. Please remember that the fund balance offsets the amount needed to be raised by taxes. And to avoid any confusion, the remaining ARPA funds are not accounted for here. So the summary page, this page shows all of the items impacting the tax rate, as I've explained, resulting in 5.31% or 35 cents per thousand. Tax rate to $6.89. We've conservatively assumed a 0.5% to 1% increase in the townwide valuation due to new construction and renovations. That's the same percentage as the budget committee recommended last year and the select board had used. And the actual increase, as determined by the State Department of Revenue and Administration last year, turned out to be 0.9%. So again, in summary, the proposed tax rate change is 35 cents per thousand or 5.31%. Before I go to questions, there's one item that I want to mention. As you will remember, in the budget for 2021, we included capital reserve funds to go to fixing the roof of the Houston barn in 2022. But we weren't sure if starting with fixing the roof would effectively result in throwing good money after bad in case there were other issues that should be dealt with first or concurrent. So the select board also established Houston Barn Committee, whose members, many of whom are here tonight, include Louise Carr, Dave Feller, Pete Holmes, Don Houston, Selena Hurley, Jason McComb, Justin Perkins, Lee Wilder, and Ben Wilson. And let me say right up front that they really dug in and did a great job. This past Monday evening, they presented their findings to the select board, and I'll try to summarize them here for you. The estimated costs that they provided resulted from a study funded for $7,500 by the town, and it was done by Milestone. And I believe the committee's recommendation is that not only the roof, but also the foundation structural repairs and jacking the building need to be addressed sooner rather than later. So they laid out 4 scenarios. One, remove the barn and replace in place an estimated cost of $2.4 million. 2, remove the barn and replace on site for $2.3 million. There's some difference in the size of those 2 proposals. There was significant discussion about the estimates for the new buildings. So that's an area that requires more follow-up. And I'll, again, just remind you that the select board has only seen this on Monday night. The third scenario presented was barn stabilization, which means addressing the most critical issues, and that would be an estimate of $875,000. And the fourth was barn rehabilitation, which includes stabilization as well as some items like fire suppression, electricity, siding, trim in some areas, heated, etc. $1.8 million. The select board did not vote on supporting any specific option because we want more information. But in general, the board was sympathetic to barn stabilization with private fundraising and grants to over time actually achieve bond rehabilitation. In the budget I just presented for 2022, available in the CRF, I'll remind you again, is about $70,000 for work on the bond. So if we did proceed with the warrant article at this coming town meeting for an amount in the $800,000 range, it was approved, there would be no impact on the tax rate for 2022. It would hit in 2023 with a 1% to 2% increase in the town portion of the tax rate, depending on the board's duration, the bond's duration and interest rate. Also briefly discussed was the possibility of using the final 2 years of the ARPA funds that I previously mentioned to reduce the amount that would have to be borrowed. But that would have a significant impact on the tax rate in 2023 and 2024. Having said all of that, please consider this as simply a heads up to the, as the select board has only received the information 2 nights ago and hasn't decided how we want to proceed if at all. But I wanted to give you all a heads up so that you weren't surprised to hear, well, there's major discussion about the bond. So with that, that completes the presentation, and we're ready for any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Ken. And Neil, to everybody who worked on preparing those budgets. Open up to questions.
I'll go first. That's okay. First off, thank you for a great presentation. I did follow the select board's budget process from the beginning. I want to say we copied it pretty much, as you know, with meeting with a lot of the leadership team and all that process, which really has helped us have a relationship. And I want to say great job on that. But my first question that I noticed in the meeting about 2 weeks ago, you talked about the audit for the unreserved fund balance and how you guys found a surplus on that. Remember that discussion? Did you guys surplus later after the audit and where it came from?
Sure. There were 2 different numbers. We didn't have the final audit yet.
Okay.
The DRA MS 535, which goes to the state earlier, had one figure, and then the final audit had the number of years.
Because it was a huge gift, and I know it helped you guys a lot. And so you guys have found a way for that not to happen again, so you guys can.
It really was with the auditors. Both
It was,
of those
okay.
came from the auditors.
Okay.
And wasn't it partly because in 2020 the audit was so delayed because of COVID?
That was part of it, and it was delayed. Getting the final audit was delayed this year also.
And the number was, I think, was it 400,000? Just one.
A little under that,
A
but
little under that. Okay.
close to that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Ken, can you, or Neil, just help me understand, why is it that the ARPA funds and the associated expenses don't flow through the operating budget? Or they're not, I mean, they're kind of like, you've got them as a separate, which is fine, I mean, because they offset each other, I understand that, but I'm just curious, what is that? Why wouldn't they be reflected here, I
They
guess?
were unanticipated revenue in 2021.
Right,
Which means, and this is the way we've been recommended to do this by our auditors, by the Municipal Association. So it's anytime you have unanticipated revenue, the select board, because they were authorized to do so by town meeting, can hold a public hearing, accept those funds and expend them for the purpose they are. So they're separate from the budget. Usually it's grants, and this is a grant, but grants and things like that. So that's why it's off budget. In order, the board wanted to offset budget expenditures with ARPA funds, which is why we kind of had to do it that way. Take the funds out of the operating budget and pay for those things with ARPA funds, not in the operating.
And in the presentation, I tried to make it very clear exactly what we were doing. with the ARPA funds. And there is a, it's like we're having a public hearing in 12 nights to, I guess, to formally accept the ARPA.
and then, Ken or Neil, do you have a sense at this point about the recent, the infrastructure bill, and yeah, I'm just thinking about, the extent to which those funds can support DPW needs in future years.
My sense is the state will be doing lots of road work, other than red listed bridges, which we actually no longer have. Municipalities probably won't be getting the money. There will be money for water and sewer probably. That's the place, but it's looking more and more unlikely all the time that we'll be getting money for roads and bridges
Okay. Or culverts.
or culverts. It looks like most of the highway funds are going to the state.
Okay.
It's funding the 10-year plan, which is always approved and never funded completely.
Questions for Ken or Neil?
I was just curious, I think you had said, Ken, the police are budgeting, in the police budget, it's 12 hours of overtime per week per year,
In addition,
an additional 12 hours per week of overtime per.
yes.
I'm just curious if if that's been exploited as higher, is it possible to hire somebody part-time to cut, like, would that be cheaper than paying the overtime? Or does it just come with the territory that emergencies are going to require an average along with details?
I'll say, I think it is, if somebody's already out on the road or whatever and dealing with something.
Right.
With it. And there's also been the issue of just trying to get people.
Right.
Police.
Okay. And then on the Houston barn, and I'm certainly not advocating this, I saw 4 different options. I didn't see just raising the building as an option.
Yeah, the first 2 were to.
Raise and replace, right?
Yes, and that actually brings up a good point that I did not address. What's the use of the building?
Right.
Currently, the ground floor, the lower part of the building is used by DPW, where they have it's filled with their equipment to deal with the Houston appeals and that whole area. The main floor is currently storage for recreation, HISA, I think a little bit with the library and Slusher Center. And the top floor is used for some kind of training for the police.
I see.
So the building is used.
So we need something.
Come again?
We need something.
Yes. There may be a little bit of space here and there in other town facilities, but not enough.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Do you anticipate that may come in this year then, that the select board might decide to take a step this year in terms of proposing a bond?
It's a possibility.
And this year you proposed $60,000 to that, the barn out in the budget.
We put some money in the CRF and the under town facilities maintenance trust for that last year. It was going to be added to the amount we're putting in this year to do the roof, and now you have to think about, well, is by just doing the roof, is that you're gonna have to repeat it and do other things, or I don't know the answer on that.
Yeah, and I did catch the presentation on Monday, and I had one question. Have they determined the longevity of that roof, like the time, like when does it need to be repairs? Because I know in other budgets, we've had to move some money away from that specific line item for the barn, and now we're putting 60 in there. When does it need to be replaced, the roof in particular? I know it was very close to
5 years ago.
5 years ago, so.
It's been pushed up.
It's been, barn issues have been kicked down.
Yeah, and it's like with deferred maintenance, right? I mean, you're trying to find one thing and, okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to think, to pass a bond, you need 66% from the town. And, either way, if it passes or not, or if it doesn't, what's the next step would be, how do you secure this bond, with a new roof, finding that money.
If we sought a bond and it was not approved, but
Yeah.
this budget before you was approved, it would. Give me a second. In the town facilities maintenance trust, we were adding $60,000 of appropriation in 2022 with the thought that up to 80,000 could be used on the barn, and initially the thought was on the roof.
Yeah,
Whether that's still the best way to spend the money, I don't know.
yeah,
But that money would be there if the bond was requested and denied. If we didn't ask for it.
so basically a contingency plan, okay.
You could do the roof for that amount of money?
That was 2 years ago, that was a.
It's 85. They just got the updated numbers.
And may I add the comment of the roof is a problem because if you do the roof now, all the advice that we're getting on the building committee is that don't do the roof until you fix the structural part inside and raise it and then lower it, because any roof that goes on, even shingled, would be perhaps distorted or injured or damaged or whatever. And one of the thoughts is in the budget of what we gave the select board was putting on a metal roof, and that really is a problem with any twisting and turning. So it's almost a package deal, it seems, where you just can't fix the roof. And then that goes back to the original question, even putting a patch on it or whatever, is it worth doing anything expenditure there if really you're gonna tear the whole building down? So it brings it back to that point again.
Thank you, Don.
In terms of for the barn, in terms of doing a bond, is there any downside? I mean, it sounds like there's a really well thought out plan with multiple different options. Is there any downside to proposing a warrant article for a bond? Well, is there, if there's a well thought out plan and the building needs to be dealt with in some sort, is there any downside to proposing a warrant article and discussing it at town meeting?
Oh, you may be getting a little ahead of where we are at this point. There were questions from at least one of my fellow select board members about the estimates for building new. And, where, could you pull that slide back? Please? Yeah, thank you. Where the removal barn and replaced, it was, $2.3 or $2.4 million. He seemed to think that it could be done, including removing the barn or whatever at a much lower price. And that's something that has to be investigated. And if it is a much lower price, do we still want to, where does that mean? What does that mean for the barn stabilization program? I don't know.
Yeah.
And certainly remember with the bond, the percentage we need to get passed is very high threshold. So we've got to be come in with a very strong case, with full support and be able to answer any questions. And we've only seen this for 2 days.
No, absolutely. And even in the case where a replacement came down and the select board, I mean, I think a different way to put it is right now, the price of a bond, we're probably never going to beat. So if we thought this plan through for another year and tried to come at it next year with a bond, that might not make as much financial sense as it does now. So even if it was differently thought out, is there still, and even if you still 66% is a relatively high bar to pass a town meeting, but is there any downside to proposing something? Or is there any real reason to not move forward with some sort of plan?
If these numbers turn out to be, very accurate, I agree with you.
maybe this is a question for Neil. Neil, we talked about bonds in the last meeting, to help with CIP and stuff, Tom made a presentation and stuff. He makes a good point about the rates being substantially low. Could the select board put this in along with additional things in CIP as one bond, or would they have to be separate descriptions for the bond? Like, could they do one bond run of, like, let's say $5 million and 1.8 goes to the barn, and then the rest goes to roads and stuff like that. So when people are voted, there's the things in there that they're like, I'm voting for this roads because, some people want a little bit more on the menu potentially.
Could certainly write a warrant article
Yeah.
to fund whatever
Okay.
you wanted. I'm sure there would be discussion around does putting everything all in one risk losing everything?
Right.
So there's political discussions around.
That's a good point.
But can it legally be done? Yes, you can
Okay.
do one. And if you had 3 bond articles, for example, you could still get one bond. So you could bond them all together.
Okay.
That's the other question.
Okay. So if you got 2 out of 3 warrants that were bond, you could just bond them all together to the same rate.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Debbie,
I might be putting the cart before the horse, but I would hope that if this were to be pursued, that it's, we have the emotional attachment to the barn for many, but also I would love to see department heads, i.e. like Donna and others who really could utilize that extra space. I know we're always looking for space for the library and for the book sale and all the items that we have too. And I was just wondering if something like that would help get to that 66% if it's something that we have in place.
Well, to start using it where there are individuals coming in, I think you'd have to go to the bond rehabilitation.
I see.
And we're the initial thought of where the select board is we were sympathetic with the stabilization and looking for donations and grants to eventually get to that next level.
Okay.
Yes, it would be wonderful to be able to have other activities at the barn and safely have other activities.
Do you know, was part of the proposal how long the barn stabilization would be effective for? Like, when would we have to look at future, like what is the life expectancy, I guess, of a stabilization project?
I don't think that question was specifically asked. I think it would buy us years, and
They can correct us behind us. But I think once the foundation's done, the foundation's done. You'd have to replace the roof. A metal roof would last much longer than an asphalt roof, but that would stabilize it.
Right.
Then the other part would cost more, but you're buying quite a few years. Is that?
Right. I guess worded differently, what I'm asking is if you did the stabilization in the next 1 or 2 years and you came down 5 years from now and tried to do the rehabilitation, you wouldn't have to redo any of the.
no, you would not. Good question, because I asked the same thing.
I think you think of it as a building block. The first one would be the stabilization. And you can build on that for the next one. And Anna Wells brought up at the meeting the other night, some of the things like you talked about. What about beyond that? That's a whole nother gamut and a whole nother set of numbers, but it's all a building block.
Right.
We're trying not to do anything that prohibits any of that growth.
It does feel like under the rehabilitation, obviously, we're not gonna solve this, but it does seem like fire suppression, given the proximity to our beautiful library and Slusser Center and everything, it does seem like that, makes both sense under safety and, money-wise. We got a lot of money invested in the buildings next to it, so.
Yeah.
And if you put in fire suppression, you have to put in at least enough heat to heat where that, it would be a dry system in the building, but you have to heat where it comes in.
So that would change the character of the building if we had to close it in and heat it, right? Because you wouldn't have that same cathedral effect that you've got
You would
now.
only need to heat like a room where the water comes in and where
Oh,
the water.
oh, so it'd be a dry system.
It would be a dry system.
Got it.
Could be an 8x8 or 10x10 room where you just have the controls and the entrance to the water.
Can I ask a slightly different question? I mean, you just got this like 2 nights ago, and clearly you guys are thinking more about it. So like on the flip side, is there anything that you guys could use from us or any questions that you might have for us that we could help with? Is there anything that, in terms of as you move forward, are there things that we can help with before you come back?
Just an initial reaction, like I said, the select board was sympathetic to the stabilization concept. I don't know if, people would agree with us. Then this is, purely preliminary. If you think the barn is, worth saving, or just kick it down the road again.
And has the select board been talking also about this building that we're in now and then the long-term need for a lot? And I'm thinking about, we have town buildings that matter a lot. We use them and they're iconic and they're important to the town. And you can get a whole head of steam on the barn, which I love and hope we do something with. But we also have this building that needs investment, which we've been hearing about for a while. So I'm just curious what's the full picture there?
Well, this building we have in reserves for 110,000 or thereabouts. It's pretty much been sitting there for a couple of years now due to COVID. Neil had also gotten some architectural plans and ways to address the changes. But
I don't think it's been because of COVID. There was a 3-year plan to fund first the driveway and then the building. And I think the funding stopped. So prior to COVID,
but it's there.
I think it got pushed off. Because our costs, our architectural costs, including the driveway, replacing the furnace and all those things that have to be done, was about 450,000 in 2018. So
There's more now.
it would be more now. Yeah, I don't have numbers beyond that.
Probably about $1 billion by now.
But it was being funded on a regular basis and then it was stopped. Not to.
But there is still 100,000+ in the reserve at this point.
There is,
Towards a budget that's going to be at least $500,000.
right. Right, and the question is it's hard to do piecemeal if you're doing certain things, if you're doing.
Right. And so I bring that up because I just am curious about how the select board, if you are talking about how do you weigh, I mean, there's obviously urgency on the barn because of the roof and the deterioration, and you have now information that gives you a path forward or some options. But I'm just curious how you weigh sequencing these two major investments in important buildings in our town.
I guess part of it, I'd say there was a very good committee who did a lot of work on the barn and made a presentation. Maybe you're raising a good point, whether or not we should have a committee on what to do with town hall. Similar.
Don, were you on the committee?
Which one?
This committee?
Yes.
On the recommendation to the select board on this rate for amounts, was the recommendation for 875 because it was one of the lowest ones, or did you get, because where I'm thinking is invested in more, we're not gonna have long-term problems and bond rates are low. Was it because it came in at a lower number to keep it stabilized, or was there any discussion that having one of the other amounts be recommended?
There was a lot of discussion.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna maybe let the chair of that, correct me if I go astray with this thing. But I think we tried to figure out what was the absolute bare minimum under the philosophy we should save the barn as a secondary item. The first item is that we need a place for the buildings and grounds, primary number one. Secondarily would be a form of storage for the various town associations that use it, but that's a secondary one. I think we think for needing the building for the buildings and grounds. So there is no room at the highway garage for that. And so that was our primary thought. And even to do that part, you've got to do the minimum here, stabilization. Now, the committee, I think, would love to have the 1.8 to do the real thing, because one of the members brought up, you spend $875,000 and the building still looks the same on the outside. People are gonna say, you know, how do we spend that? And it still looks like it looks. But there's a lot of other things in there that are very important, mainly the fire suppression is probably the key item to protect the other two buildings.
Yeah.
So I think it was a balance, and because of the tight budget restrictions for the town and the tax rate, everybody, you know, we're very concerned with that. But trying to get the minimum out and presented, and then let, you know, the select board decide which way they wanted to go, whether they wanted to do one or the other. Was that a fair summary?
Yep, yes, but I also, if I may, it's more of a concern than just the roof. Yes, the roof is leaking and it's causing rot. But we had Peter Ladd come through the Preservation Alliance grant. He's a bond historian, and he came through and did a very detailed report. And he pointed out things that driving by or walking into that barn, you're not going to notice. Yes, you notice that the shingles are laying out in the driveway. But you have the foundation, you'll notice it has the cracks on both further corners. Over the last 20 years, since the first structural engineering report was done until now, it has been indicated that there's freezing and thawing of that foundation with the cracks is now pushing outward, and it is out of, has pushed out several inches. So that is a concern. Another concern is the primary timber post. There's rot, the ones that are sitting on the concrete columns, so they're rotting. We have platypus beetles. One of the main, they call it the attic block level post C, but it's one of the main structural posts. So that one has had some damage, and if that one fails, and it's very critical, that has to be taken care of sooner rather than later, because if that one fails, we have a domino effect. Because your other braces that come down, also the supports down have been pulling away, and so the whole thing is not as structurally sound as it looks, because over the years things have been shifting and changing, and things have come loose, and there is a lot of rot. So there are some things that really need to be dealt with, because if we have a really heavy snow load, or we have some really strong winds, there is that potential that you're gonna lose that main post, and then you got a problem. So it's more than that. So that's things that were identified in that report that we received.
Thank you for sharing that. So Ken, I mean, you have asked in response to Thomas's question, you know, what's the sense of members of this committee? I don't think we're taking a vote on anything today, but I just would invite people to share their thoughts with Ken, so you can have a sense, you know, of individuals on this committee to bring back to the select board. And I'm going to share two thoughts for you to consider. One, just to follow up on this building, I think it would be helpful to understand from the select board, how does the barn stack up with the town hall in terms of buildings that need capital investment? Are they comparably important? Is one more urgent than the other? You know, there's some good reasons why there's urgency around the barn. But we also have a bunch of town employees who work in this building 5 days a week. It's the place of business for our town. And so, and we've been hearing about the needs for this building for many years. So I just would urge the select board to have that, because just because a group of people spent a bunch of time on the barn doesn't mean it's more important than the town hall. I think you got that discussion should happen. I'm not suggesting it isn't, just think it'd be helpful to understand.
Fair point.
And then the second thing I just would urge you all to think about is, like, I think, how do I say this? Always putting forward what's the least amount of money we can spend on something is like a scarcity mindset. And I think if we really want to build support for this, I think there's an opportunity probably to raise a bunch of private money to offset the town's investment. Bonding money and then raising private money afterwards is not a successful path to fundraising, because you lose the urgency. You're going to donors. Now, once you've bonded the money, the town is essentially, the mentality is it's paid for. And so I would urge you to think bigger and more comprehensively, like, what is the campaign to save iconic, important buildings in our town? And what part of that might come from private funding, and do some feasibility. I mean, people out there could help with some feasibility around fundraising to see what's the appetite in this community. And we have a lot of people in our town who could support this if they felt it was important. And I think it would be helpful to test that. So I would just urge the select board to think about, think bigger and think about private fundraising.
I think the thinking when going with funding barn stabilization and not going all the way to rehab is that people would be more willing to donate to, the next step, which would be the rest of the rehab, once they do the town was, stabilizing.
Right. I might suggest it's the opposite, because urgency is a very powerful motivator in fundraising. And so for people who care about this barn, the idea that it might collapse and we might lose it altogether might be more compelling for some folks than the longer term. So I just would say, I think that's something that should be tested. I think you have an assumption there that I would say should be tested about people's appetite and interest in what they would contribute.
So tested that we put out that the barn's in imminent danger of collapsing, but we're not going to put up any money. We want donations to do it.
No, testing, what is the appetite for people in this community who may have the means to make big philanthropic donations to help save the barn?
And what is your thinking? What would the town be putting up of property tax funds?
Well, I think the town would need to bond money, right? So this is a great time to bond money. Like Thomas tells us every budget committee meeting, right? This is a good time to bond money, but concurrently, I would have a fundraise. I just think you might be a better sell to the taxpayers if people, you might be able to bond less money, let me put it that way, if there was private philanthropy that was willing to match the town money. And I would say that you can the opportunity to line up private philanthropy is sooner rather than later, which means having somebody who knows something about fundraising, talking to people in this community who might have the means to support it.
One thing I didn't hear, and I recall from a meeting or two, that wasn't there a match based on potentially, if you like, of $200,000? Isn't that something that was
there? Yes, I believe it was mentioned there was a possibility of a $200,000 grant, and we were viewing that as well as private donations, which would bring us from the 875 to 1.8.
And that might be the way to go. I just think there are people who can help you with that. I would start with the bigger vision. Maybe let's really start with let's get to barn rehabilitation. Not like let's do stabilization and maybe someday we'll do rehabilitation. I think it's better to sell the complete vision. This is where we need to get to. And then how can we get there? What's the town's contribution and what might private fundraising be able to contribute? Don, and then.
Yeah, I suggest that Louise comment on your thought process there, because I believe part of this process was way back early she did go to the Preservation Association, and they basically said there's a potential of $200,000 of funding if the town matched it. But they need a plan that's been sanctioned by the town that is really going forward before you can even take that step. And that next step would not come to fruition until late fall of next year, because you got to do the application. As I understand, once the town commits to doing something. Is that a fair summary of that,
Yes.
please?
Yes, and one of the steps we have to take to get that preservation, actually it's LCHIP money, is we had to get the grant from the Preservation Alliance, get the bond study done, which we have. So that's one of the steps you have to take prior to applying to LCHIP. We can't apply to LCHIP until we know there's a project going to move forward. So it's kind of like,
Chicken and egg.
yeah, yes. So, but yes, we are planning on doing that. And as far as the private fundraising, we do have someone who's on our committee. That's what she has done in the past for work. And basically, what she is saying is for the 875 stabilization, it's not likely you're going to get money for that because the town owns the building. But if we want to move forward,
Right, okay,
then we can get the private money.
Okay.
So that's,
thank you.
so we have been exploring all of them.
Awesome, that's great.
I think the way Ken described it is you've almost got to do the commitment first,
Right.
and fundraising would be beautiful for the second phase.
Could be sold as a package. The town would be putting up money, to get one of those started. And then any fundraising that came in would add to that. So that both parties are involved, has some skin in the game. Urgency is fine, but once any money came from the town, that could go away. And you would have no fundraising. But if you tried to sell it as a package, fundraising and the town,
Right.
that might work.
Yeah,
Norm, and
just to follow up to your comment, about what Mark had said regarding the two amounts, if you remember with the building project, we were told no at 32. And then we had to go back down and start over again and get to a survey out to the community, and the community was able to tell us that around 10, they would approve the bond. So it takes a little bit of getting a feel from the community through multiple avenues of what they would support. Just want to share a little history.
Yeah, so in terms of what can be helpful to you and general vibe of where people land, personally, I also seem very sympathetic to the idea. It sounds like there's a very well thought out plan and group organization behind this. So that to me is really positive. One thing that I would definitely add in terms of the thinking bigger, not smaller aspect is if there was a bond to go forward for just the just the first part, just the stabilization, I would definitely suggest also putting forth another bond to then complete out the rest of it to go into the rehabilitation. And I think that personally, to me, if this board was evenly split on whether or not that bond or not should be should go forward, and even if the select board was evenly split, I think there's still a ton of value in putting that forth at town meeting. Because if the majority of the town says this is a building we want to keep, it's worth having a very large discussion with everybody as to whether or not that project should be the whole amount or just keeping the building around. So I would personally definitely recommend doing both.
Then you'd be doing away with the need for fundraising.
Well, I mean, the fundraising, like if there was $200,000 of matching funds, that could offset, that still comes in as value. That can offset bond payments and decrease the total impact. So like, essentially, we would be voting as a town to say, this is how much we want to do. And then if there was matching funds that come in, that can offset things. And I definitely still agree with Mark that the more money we can get committed from private donors before having the bond, the better, because that to me seems like a better time to get commitments, but it's all part of the same thing to me.
Other comments?
I just have a question, and I probably ought to know this at this point, but if we bond, whatever, let's say we bond whatever it was, the 1.8. Does that, and then you get private donations of 500,000. Do we need to use the full 1.8? Could we use 1.3 at that point? Just in terms of like, is that money then committed to that project?
Some of it depends on how you bond it. If it's through the bond bank, you get it all and you don't have the option of paying it back in the same way. If you got it from a commercial bank, like we did the fire station, you could borrow it piecemeal as you used it and you never borrow. You're not committed to borrowing the full 1.8. You could borrow only what you need and never borrow the rest. But with the bond bank, once it goes out, you've got that amount. You can, like we redid all the debt last year. But that's kind of a one-time thing. So those are some of the options. If you were going to fundraise, you probably wouldn't want to use the bond bank and bonds to do that. Although their rates are substantially lower, so it might pay off. So
Does the bond bank have really payback penalties?
they don't. You just can't.
You just can't. Got it. Okay.
I was just thinking in terms of like the timing of it, you know, having been involved in some fundraising things, you know, a lot of times people give money toward the last quarter of the year, but we would be voting on the bond in first quarter of the year. So I'm mindful of the urgency in terms of motivating people to give, but also just thinking about, but also this timing tension of Tom is always bringing us back to, which I think is a super valid point, that money is cheapest now. So I'm just sort of wondering about, is it possible to pull together a pitch to the town? We think that this, again, it's just, we think that this rehabilitation is important because it satisfies safety concerns in addition to the iconic value and the function of the building. Money is cheapest now, so it makes sense to, borrow this, but then we're also going to try to see what we can raise to maybe not use this full amount, that kind of thing.
You also, if you're authorized for 1.8 million, just like the school took half and half, you could take a portion in the summer sale or the spring bond sale and not do the rest until this time of year.
Of course, the obvious problem is the pitch is, well, if we just borrowed the money, then why am I opening up my checkbook to?
You're not going to.
That's it.
So that takes away the
Once
urgency.
the money's sort of from the town, it's hard to.
Just sort of.
Have you ever handled this?
Yeah, I did. I was just wondering what's the most likely term on a bond, if either the 1.8 million proposal or the 875,000 proposal, and what would the annual payment look like?
I believe that we did have a slide on that for a 10-year bond. It was about 100,000 a year.
Yeah, 105 the first year and it goes down. That's
for the 875.
That's a 10-year 875 at 2%.
2%. Thank you.
Debbie,
But it sounds like either way, we've got to make a commitment in order for things to move forward and even be considered for the 200,000 or the other.
This committee does not have to make it.
No, I apologize.
The select board may decide in 2 weeks, no, we're not going to do anything.
But either way, whether the select board does or not, then if things were to move forward, then a commitment has to be made by the town for at least one portion of that in order to even apply for the 200,000, if things would move forward.
Right.
Okay. And then in order to pull in philanthropic people, to bring in money for that, then you could have that second project part of it, what I'm hearing.
I'm sorry, just one more thing. I suppose the other thing to consider here and sort of looking at this is what is the cost of doing nothing?
Again,
What is the cost of doing nothing? That is, how likely is it, how quickly is the barn going to deteriorate? And then what is that cost? You know, in terms of the functionality, but also, you know, dealing with that. So, I mean, I suppose that's the other side that needs to be considered when folks are considering this particular issue.
and as the select board digs into it more, you know, a very valid concern, but like I said, we have kicked it down the road for years and it's in bad shape.
Right.
Right.
So trying to put a number on that, obviously nobody has a crystal ball, but it seems like that would be a valid factor to consider.
I just wanted to vocalize my support for an earlier suggestion, which is, it does seem to be that this is an issue where members of the town have strong opinions and some emotional attachment otherwise. And I think that the select board, at least using a warrant article for some level of bond as a gesture to bring in front of the town and let folks vote on it is a good way to judge that community support for a way to move forward. So just something for the select board.
Appreciate that.
I agree with that.
Any further comments?
Yeah, to bring in a slightly different thread, possibly open a can of worms as well.
Night is young.
So one of the things that was mentioned really early on is the offset of $200,000 of the shipping and paving using the ARPA funds. And there's also 3x that's being reserved from the ARPA funds over the next 3 years. To me, that personally seems a little bit of a similar situation that we got into a couple of years ago with the school and the one-time payment of the state education funds. And at that point, there was a lot of conversation around whether or not we are kind of digging a little bit of a hole by offsetting. If we're like, if the purpose of the decrease is to chase a total number of yearly increase in the budget, and we're using one-time funds to offset that, we're really just pushing that increase down the road. And something that's very interesting to me about the town's budget as a whole is that number of 5.4% increase, even with all of these other funds being used, is still decently under yearly inflation. And if you look line by line, there's not really any wasteful spending. It's not like there's any massive increases that are easy to argue with or anything like that. And so from that perspective, it might be worth looking at using those ARPA funds not to offset that budget and to say, listen, this is what our budget increase is, and then using those ARPA funds to do stuff like this, or in terms of like a broader scope of how are we looking at this plus town hall plus any other major needs using that funds. Just a thought.
As I mentioned, we're using 1/3 of the ARPA funds this year, thinking, we want to try to stabilize rates. I certainly hear what you're saying. It's a valid point. There are different expense and revenue things are going to be hitting that we know of in future years. For instance, the Fairpoint settlement, we're not going to have 45,000 hit next following year.
Yep.
We certainly don't expect. Well, we know Chief Recorder is not going to be retiring again. There are, with the hope that 2 years or so, 3 years, the solar array at the transfer station will start bringing in revenues, and ideally that'll be 150,000 a year. There are just a lot of things up in the air. But I hear what you're saying.
I'd just like to say that I think doing this project would be useful because the space that we're using now is valuable, and the cost of constructing new buildings is just insane, really. A highway garage well over $1 million. So I think $800,000 would be a wise investment to rehabilitate this building. That's my vote.
Thank you, Rich. Steve?
Yeah, total kind of like right turn. This is probably a question that gets asked every year, but in the commercial sector, especially for large commercial entities that use a lot of things, I'm thinking of lubricants, number two, fuel oil, diesel, gasoline, road salt. There are mechanisms in place to kind of offset the cost increases and level the cost over the years. Pre-buy contracts, futures markets, things like that are commonly used. Does the town have anything like that in place for, I mean, I'm looking at your road salt, that's not news, is basically doubling this year. Obviously, and the numbers in here are fairly conservative for diesel and fuel. So what I'm saying is, if I'm running Audley Construction, I have mechanisms in place to kind of offset some of those sharp spikes in cost increases. Otherwise, I would go out of business. Do towns have the same availability of those types of mechanisms?
So salt, for example, is a state bid,
Mhm.
and it just wasn't available. This is pretty unusual. And like with our fuel, all of our number two oil, we go out to bid with the school. So we have a contract that does run from July 1st through June 30th each year. Right, now, it's a pretty good deal, the way things have gone up. Our diesel is also bought on a state bid, and we don't use a lot of gas, but we buy it directly from the state at the station. So we do use all of those things that kind of have features. We contract out for those.
Okay, so there are basically mechanisms in place that the town's already using to kind of stabilize for those.
Right, salt
Especially
is across the board. The
Yeah.
state's getting hit in every single municipality. I don't know if you've read the articles in the newspaper that's really hit hard on everybody's budget. And from experience, it never seems to drop back down to where it was. It always stays. So it may come down, but at some higher.
Unfortunately.
Can I have a very kind of micro question, but micro level question? Maybe the macro question is, how is the town thinking? I know you have a 3.5% wage increase for town staff. Merit increase, sorry, which is great. Looking around out there in the world, salaries are growing much faster than that across many sectors. And I'm just looking at your Kimball. I remember, I think it was last year, there was a real shortage of lifeguards in Kimball Pond. There was a question of whether the pond could stay open. And I look at the wages that are in here, and I will just say both of my teenagers make more than that.
And those are the increased.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering. So I guess I'm just wondering, and maybe this is a question for you, Neil. How are you feeling about the wage scale for town employees across the board? And are there places where we are vulnerable given our wage scale right now?
We seem to still be in line with other municipalities. Things are just all over the place, it seems, in the market. So that's,
yeah,
for us, town municipalities always look so much better when employment is when it's harder to get a job, and rates go down more quickly in the private sector than the benefits. So we monitor that. We probably will be updating our scales. This is the year we're due to do it, but we have watched that. We have made some increases during the year in places that we need to. Right now, we're 3 police officers short, for example, but it doesn't seem to be. It was just.
It's not so much
timing.
It's not
Does
wage
not seem to
related,
be
right?
Pay related, and we're not losing people because of
Yeah.
salary.
Okay, that's good to hear. Thank you.
I can just add, while you refer to Kimball Pond and the wages, the board had a discussion about, if you'll notice, the cost of wages is going up by 47% for the pond. And we had a discussion about if it were keeping lifeguards. making it just open, swim at your own risk. And the board decided that we would, raise the pay for lifeguards with the hope that all it can get people and, swallow the increase, but that discussion did take place.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. I'm glad to having that conversation.
Ken, we had a school board meeting last night, and I was asked to bring a question to you. Jim wanted it for public record as a letter from the board, but I had mentioned to him that since I was seeing you tonight, that I would bring the question to you. The board has asked, what is the plans for the fence over at George Park, and when do you plan on a projection of replacing it? And they wanted to provide this to you in anticipation of some feedback on that.
A fair question, and I would throw a question back to Jim. When we had the joint school board select board meeting, he had raised the issue of some kind of a committee to work on George Park. I think for the costing, how it should be operated, recognizing that the town pays the costs and the school takes advantage of the facilities, basically. So is there a more equitable way to do it? As far as I know, nothing has happened. But beyond that, to more directly respond to your question, we have recreation facilities capital reserve fund, and right now we're proposing to put $50,000 into that fund in 2022, leaving roughly $46,000 at the end of the year. So funds could be used for the fence, but I would certainly like to understand where the school board is on sharing costs of the facility first. We do also in 2023 have 100,000 for George Park bathrooms and 15,000 for a well and pump house there. So, I think there are other issues. The fence, yes, is one, but it should go beyond that.
Yeah, and I do remember the joint meeting in which we had that discussion about a committee to talk about that.
So just to follow up, there is a George Park plan that Ken will let is done by a committee. So that is in the plan, the fence,
Okay.
along with it. And in 2018, the cost was estimated at $14,400
For the fence?
for the fence. So that would be higher now. Certainly, but that was in.
Yeah, and then, so at 14,000, we're probably looking probably a little bit higher. Would it be possible to get a copy of that plan so I could forward to the board?
Sure,
Is it online?
it is.
Oh, okay. And
It was fairly extensively discussed in 2018.
yeah, he should remember since he was on.
Yeah, he was the chair of the select board at that point.
Yeah, because I'd asked him last night what the cost of the fence was. He said he didn't want to shoot out a number. And so if you're saying 14,000, I think where the board was discussing last night was the safety of the children, with how the fence is and stuff. And, I can't advocate right now because I'm only one board member, but I agree with you having a discussion in that committee on cost share down the road. If that's the approach both boards want to do, it's worth having that discussion. I guess I just don't know the path forward and what they're looking for a timeline for that to be replaced. We're still in our budget process and you're still in yours. But I will get back to Jim and the board about the committee and set forth.
And remind him that for 8 or 9 years now, I've offered to lease the George Park to the schools for $1 a year long-term lease.
$1 a year.
And take care of everything.
Not sure that's gonna fly, but
It comes up regularly.
yeah.
People think that George Park is a school park, for school facilities. That's not the way it's operated. Paid for.
How much money is in that?
School does it when they ask about the fence.
How much money is in the account now? that you mentioned there was 50,000 budgeted to go into it this year?
What I show is 16,000
Sounds right.
as of the end of this calendar.
And is there money proposed to be spent from that in this budget that you just presented?
The year after is the bathhouses.
Yeah, in 2022, there's 20,000 projected to be spent for the wheel and well and pump at Houston Fields, leaving 36,000.
So there's not a timeline right now for replacing the fence. I mean, I'm just kind of getting, you had a question of when the fence can be replaced.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's not in the current plan.
It's not.
It's in a plan for George's Park, but it's not in the current spending
It's not in
plan.
this,
CIP.
but, and what I'm saying is that there are dollars that are not, it doesn't mean, just because we show 20,000 for this, it's whatever the
Something
balance
else.
is in the
Right.
recreation facilities is will be critical.
So there's no timeline?
I think we can put a timeline on it. Get back to you with that.
Okay, so I'll just tell Jim to bring it, I'm sure you'll bring it back to the board next week and discuss it with them and let Jim and the board know that I will relay your message, but if you could talk to your board to just say we have this discussion in public, it would be, I think, helpful for everybody. Please.
Fair enough.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for raising it.
Yeah, thank you.
Any further questions or comments for,
I'll lend Norm the dollar if he needs it for the school board.
Lend it to, I'm gonna give it to him.
yeah.
Mark, if we're finished with that, I was just going to give a real quick update on our financials for the end of November.
Great.
And again, I'll just be very quick, and you should have the pages in front of you. At this point, in terms of revenues, we're anticipating that we'll end up at least 100,000 to the good, which is the critical item there. And the main driver, I would say, is going to be motor vehicle permits again. And on expenses, we anticipate coming in very close, probably just under budget because of unexpected things like Fairpoint and the chief's severance. And really, I wasn't planning to go into any more detail on that. In 2 weeks, the select board will be getting estimated year end.
Ken, any questions for Ken?
Thank you, Ken.
Ken, can I wanted to just ask you, we have a meeting on the books for next Wednesday. Do you anticipate there will need to be further discussion of the town's budget next week?
I know we do not have a select board meeting in between. So I don't have anything. I personally, I'd be happy if we didn't have a meeting.
Thank you for registering your opinion.
Second.
Great, thank you for all the work.
Can I ask one more question?
Oh,
Sorry, I
yeah.
totally forgot. So there's no road bond plans. There's no road improvement spending plans
No.
at all. Good try.
Okay, thank you for that. And thank you, Lee and Louise, for the work on the barn. Neil, thank you for sticking around. We're going to turn it over to you, Norm,
You
for
want the hot seat?
the school.
Sure.
That might be taking too deep for me.
Even like the
I didn't get that. I didn't.
All right.
So I'm gonna start with a couple, just updates on some things, because there's not much going on in our financials that you guys have seen. But the first thing I want to talk to you is about the building project. So right now with the building project, we had a meeting back on November 22nd with BPS as the building committee. And that was the deadline for BPS to inform us of when we were going to receive a total number back from the building project for us to decide. So the total number back from BPS that is set in stone was a lot higher than what I had said in the previous meeting, because it was only a number that was with open invoices still, and they had to wait for those invoices to be paid. So the number back from BPS was $402,000, with the overage on the bond. The total number that is back to us is a total of $370,000. So the next step that happens.
BPS stand for?
BPS.
Yeah.
I totally could Google it on stage, yeah. So they are the construction firm for the project. So they had.
Oh, but this is basically money that is left over.
That is left.
Sorry, I just want to make sure.
No, that's okay. So it's part of their contingency, and that's with us closing out line items.
This is the money that's left.
Correct. Yeah. So we have a total of $370,000 that will be discussed next week in our building committee meeting, in which we will make a recommendation to the school board of our remaining balance, in which the board will vote on. Some of the recommendations with the additional fundings that we're receiving from this project will be additional flooring at many of the schools. We are looking at getting a quote for the skylights over at Maple Street, maybe designing it better, and close it in and having some type of LED lights. But we have HL Turner right now working on a quote for us, so we can gather our information on that. Once we receive those numbers, we will deliberate and discuss it, with the remaining balance going potentially to CIP for the school district. As you know, we have a lot of projects and a lot of things down the road for the school district in which we need to replace. We know we need to replace a boiler over at Harold Martin, which is about $150,000. I believe it's in next year's CIP. So our plan is to make a recommendation to the board, bring it to our meeting, which is December 21st, and present them with what we believe we want to do with the remaining balance of this bond project. This project, you received a detailed form of every single adult that we did in this project from when money was released back to us. And at the bottom of the document, you can see that number of 370,000. That would close the books for the project. And with this 370 would be a new project in which we'd be using with BPS it could be with BPS, it could be with other vendors. It gives us an opportunity to potentially quote it with other people. We've decided so far we're still using BPS as our liaison for feedback, HL Turner for quotes, because they still have work they need to do in the district. They need to continue to do some stuff that they got to come back for that's under warranty. So that is pretty much the update for the building project. It's exciting. It's a good amount of money, and we're excited to make a recommendation to the board to help with many different things in our schools.
That's great, Norm. Would you consider taking some of that money, and since you said that the fence at George's Park is a safety issue, would you consider putting some of that money towards cost sharing with the town to replace the fence if the school board thinks that's important?
Thank you, Mark.
I asked on the side, kind of nudging Michelle, just kind of nudging her, and we can't because it's not part of that. That had to come out of the fund balance type thing, like towards the end of the year as a one-time expense. So these funds have to be used specifically, stuff that was basically carved out of the project that we did in the beginning. As you know, fire suppression was not in there for the classroom. The glass windows, the glazed windows that we did those are all carved out. So when we went through this whole process of all the adults, we decided to make a priority list. And for us, it was important to the community to say, whatever money we get back, we're gonna go down the list of what was taken out of the bond that is part of deferred maintenance that needs to get done down the road. And so we are trying to keep that methodology. That's part of the reason for the skylights over at Maple Street. That was one that was carved out. And working with Jay Burgess, who is the superintendent over for Concord, he's been very, very helpful in this process for us, in which he said, you know, this was one of the next steps we need to get a quote on over at Maple Street, and then put it towards flooring, because there's a lot of additional rooms that need to get done. And then we're going to deliberate, discuss that, and hopefully the rest will go to CIP, because we really need to continue to invest into our CIP significantly. So yeah, that's great news. And I mean, it's wrapped up, but I'm looking forward to the discussion. And once I hear back from the board, I will bring their recommendation on it. Great. You got all your questions for Ken. All right.
That wasn't great.
So I put in there just last night, superintendent gave us a new enrollment report, you know, just for you guys to kind of see and what's going on. I'm sure that will be coming up later in our budget cycle, some questions you guys might have, but I just wanted to share this information with you guys that we received it last night, and it was great to review to see where we are. Any questions on that? You guys are easy tonight. You're just waiting for the budget questions, aren't you? So next thing, I'll give you a little bit of an update on the budget. As of right now, the board is approaching a date of our next board meeting, which is the 21st, I believe. Is it this Tuesday, the 21st? I can't remember. Yes, thank you. So December 21st, we have a board meeting, and in that meeting, we anticipate having a voted on operating budget along with our warrants. As of right now, the school board has directed the superintendent, you know, for a 2.5% increase on the budget back a couple of meetings ago. And Delcy and Rob and him and Michelle have worked very hard in the finance committee to find savings and other ways in which we can use in our budgeting process. Last night, the board had a little bit of discussion of what we would support for a tax rate impact, which I thought was a good discussion. This is variable, this is not fixed. This could change because we are still in negotiations with the teachers. So it's really important that we understand that we are working around different avenues in this budget. We've established last night that we want to create a trust for health insurance trust. So if we get savings in health insurance for when the GSR, I think it's called, when it comes back, let's say 75,000, we are putting that into a trust. And so it gives us an opportunity that when there's an off year, the insurance is high, we can withdraw from that offset. So it helps with savings in that. We discussed putting about $100,000 into the special ed trust, because this year we had a significant amount of savings in that. And instead of using that savings in the budget, we decided, you know what, we don't know what's going to happen with special ed. So we want to be able to put about 100,000 into that. Again, these aren't locked in, these are just discussions at the table. In my opinion, as someone who does finance for a living, it's a good way of saving for the unknown and not just taking the cost savings and just saying we don't know what's going to happen on a variable and important thing. So that is something the town would have to vote on and support, because it's a new trust in which the school board would then hold a public hearing, of course, and withdraw, just like any other trust that we would do. So the number that was mentioned last night, again, it's variable, was about a tax impact of about 132, 134. That's all in. all warrants, projection. So we will have some type of discussion on the 21st, and then we'll have some information for Mike and I to bring into the budget committee for our presentation in January. But must say I'm very pleased with the hard work of the board, our superintendent, Michelle, and everyone in the district that's really have developed this budget that I feel started much earlier in order for community involvement and for many people to be able to ask questions sooner and have more of a slower pace in collecting data to get us a number that we could be fiscally responsible and maintain invested into the schools. Because Mike essentially is going to get a budget approved from the school, and he's going to decide what he feels is best, creating positions or whatnot. Mike knows what the board would like. It's his job to find the ways to make it happen with what we approve.
Is the 2.5% the operating budget increase only?
Yeah, that's what it was. But there will be some moving pieces using our unreserved fund balance and using some of Article 10, of course, to absorb the increase in our tax impact.
The new trust fund and the special ed trust, additional 100,000, that's in addition to the 2.5% on the operating budget. I assume is to be warrants.
It'd be a warrant.
So that comes down to a bottom line.
Yep.
And your expectation was $1.32 increase total in the tax rate.
$1.32, $1.34 potential variable. Don't lock me in. Put that in a minute, please.
But the contract is not in that number.
It is.
Okay, that you're anticipating. contract.
Anticipating all in.
Good.
What was discussed in the board meeting last night in public was around 132, 134. Delsey can yell at me because she's watching, but that's what I recall last night, all in with everything, just variable. You know, we can't commit to a number without completing negotiation. And, you know, our job is to produce an operating budget that meets the needs of our students and our teachers, and that we can produce a safe learning environment for all students in education.
You have a percent that goes with the 134?
Huh?
You have a percent that goes with the 134? I don't have my numbers.
No. I bet you Tom might know that percent.
7.2.
7.2. Thank you, Tom.
No problem.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
But don't quote me on that. That's like based on numbers from town meeting last year. Could be.
You mean it might be 7.9? No.
It could be.
Plus or minus.
Could be different.
No, but I just hope the budget committee has seen that they started our budget process earlier, and having you guys see what we have done from the beginning with all the positions that we wanted and the discussions we've had. It's a different process, and we have some people who are just really caring, really educated, bringing out the best in our budget and being able to communicate what we can do in order to run a fiscally responsible budget that meets the needs for our students.
I'm just curious, Norm, did you guys, just in looking at the enrollment stuff, it's just interesting because we talked a lot about the projected enrollments and how that would affect everything.
Yeah.
You know, it's like 17, 18, and 19. We got 942, 974, 957, and then 2021 is 902, 21, 22 is 908. It seems like there's a big drop.
For what years?
If you look at 17, 18, and 19 compared to 20 and 21 enrollment numbers.
Yep.
Like, did you guys?
It was not discussed, but it's a very good question to ask, which I'm happy to do.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, is it like homeschooling? Is it like in terms of the state funding for, you know, people pulling their kids out? Is it, because I think Tom shows like population of the town is outpacing.
Yeah.
You're specifically looking at the 2019 to 2020?
I was looking at the historical percentage change of total enrollment K through 12.
But from which year to which year?
So I was looking at 16, so year 16, 17, year 17, 18, year 18, 19 compared to 19, 20, I'm sorry,
Yeah, 1920.
compared to 2021 and 21-22, which is like 902 and 908.
Yeah.
There's like 50 less, basically.
Yeah, the same thing happens in 2012. 2012, right? It drops by like 70 from 2012 to 2014.
Yeah, and I don't pretend to have any kind of knowledge about it. I'm just kind of curious because I remember, I don't know if it was last budgetary cycle or the one before, when we were really talking about the projected enrollment and how that affected the budget, but
It's a question I can try and poke Mike about and see if we can find out some information on why. Yeah, let me check into it, see what I can find. And you know, I think Andrea talked about last night a little bit that, you know, projected down the road, we will be having less state funded per pupil that will be coming. So, I mean, it's something that this board, you know, and any future board has to understand is a big concern. You know, or consider a property court down. Make it very, very clear it affects us all. And that there's going to have to be some discussions about that, you know, what we need to do. And I hope that that changes on the state level, because I can tell you, yeah, it's just, we don't get enough support.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Last meeting, when Mike was here, he discussed how our support staff relative to other districts is underpaid, and how that this weren't on support and it would rectify some of that.
Yep.
Is there a similar concern on the teachers' contracts for this school district? Are we having any retention issues? I've read nationally there are significant retention issues with teachers retiring. I
don't know how to answer that, because I would not know. I would not know the answer. That'd be a Mike question.
Okay.
Because I can say for the HES contract, I think that is a healthy discussion to say that we made them more whole for retention, because there's been so many issues about, you know, higher positions for that because of compensation in other districts are much comparable. Here we have such a low one. Part of the negotiation was to kind of bridge the slim areas between other locations. But that would be a Mike thing for him to answer when he's here, because if we reach an agreement, he'd be able to answer that.
So for the impact, that $1.34 predicted impact, is that the total cost of the 3 years of the contract?
No. $1.34. So there is no contract. Let's make that.
No, right.
Yeah. So we're just talking about 1 year. 1 year impact on the tax rate, potentially variable, that we felt comfortable that if we came back for $1.34 impact, all warrants and all budget and contract, that we would support it as a board.
So, but just to be clear, so there's a 3-year contract.
It could be a 2 times.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Let's pretend it's a 5-year contract, right? Just because I'm trying to make sure I'm getting the number right.
Yeah.
So let's pretend it's a 5-year contract. There is no contract.
Yeah.
So the projected impact of $1.34, that's what the increase from this year to next year would be, right?
So it'd be the increase next year.
Right. So then, but then in year 2 to 3, there'd be 0 increase due to a contract, and then 3 to 4, there'd be 0 increase.
No, because you have a contract, it would be a warrant, right?
Right.
So you would, let's say it was a 5-year contract.
Right.
On that warrant, there'd be an impact, a total amount. And
Yeah.
let's say the first year was 500,000, second year was 600,000, following year was 800,000.
Got it. So that $1.34 would just be the 1 year.
Just 1 year, but that's the total tax impact. Don't get hung up on the numbers. I'm just telling you what we discussed before. It's important to give your superintendent, your finance committee direction of what we feel comfortable in order to find savings in the budget or other ways to invest into the quality of education for our students. So when we get together, you know, we're not necessarily debating positions, but we're debating whether or not this meets the needs of our students and if we're being fiscally responsible to the taxpayer. I'm excited to bring you guys our budget because we will be having a new budgeted program, which I'm very happy to say we will not implement that until January because of how it is uploaded into the system. So last year or 2 years, I lose track now, we invested money from our unreserved fund balance to purchase a new software in which, in order to get it ready, you have to do it by a specific window, which would be 2022. So by bringing that presentation to you guys, I'm not sure what Mike is thinking of using in that, but it'll be something different that I think that the budget committee will be very pleased with. It's an investment that I've truly supported. Any questions? All right, so I have two more things. Then I'm going to go on to one other important thing. So I have the financials in there. There wasn't anything that was significant that stood out. We're still very early in the process. Michelle was out for a little bit, so I will have another update for you guys in November, which we will have more missing pieces. I think what's important to understand is that we're able to look at the unreserved fund balance right now, which is I think around 373 on here, in which we will be looking to kind of get a feel for what we can use in our budgeting process when it comes to December 21st. So Michelle is continuously looking at this and deciding what our next steps are. Excellent. So the last thing I'd like to talk to you is about strategic planning. When we hired Mike about 6 months ago or so, one of the things Mike Flynn had asked us about was whether or not the district had a strategic plan. And we told him we did not. And one of Mike's goals was to create a strategic plan. And after reviewing multiple districts and seeing what they have produced and even businesses, I'm really starstruck to see that, wow, why didn't we have this? Because it was really a great thing to be able to see a community put together, business put together with really some great ideas that they could support when it comes to planning for the future financially and other reasons. So about a month ago, a committee was assembled. I would like to thank Jonathan, who is representing the budget committee on there, for joining us. He's been very, very supportive, bringing some great ideas and really helping the process. And we are meeting quite frequently to go over certain specific topics, as you guys can see in your packet, that we are going to be soliciting the community on feedback from. You guys are extremely important to the process, and it is important for us to be able to have feedback from the select board, from the budget committee, from anyone in this town, not just the parents, not just our students, from all taxpayers. It's really important that we find some way of communicating to everyone, because everyone has a vision, everyone has a thought, because this strategic plan that we are producing as a board is going to be something that we're going to be held accountable to. So if we have a specific word in there saying we must invest into sustainable energy or something like that, that's something that we have in there saying we need to budget $150,000 for this, and this is the reason why. If Deb comes up to the mic and says, that's ridiculous, you guys should not be paying $150,000, blah, blah, blah. We have a document that's been approved from this board from the discussions with the community saying, Deb, we love you, we understand that, but this is something that has been agreed upon from this board, and we are investing into it. It has been a great experience, and I'm excited to talk to people, but it also starts with you guys too. I can't do it all. One person, father, three, that your input on what we can do, your voice being heard, is extremely important. And in that document was an outline of the stuff we have talked about, and it's going to be very important that we hear from many people. And one of the ways we plan on doing that is with this committee, reaching out to people in our network, this committee, other places, but also through surveys is the next step. It doesn't stop here. It continues to grow, and we gather more information. Jonathan, would you like to speak to anything about this committee?
Sure. So I guess what I would say is, first of all, I just want to say I'm participating on this steering committee, not representing the budget committee. I'm on the budget committee. I'm in this steering committee, but I certainly don't hold myself out as speaking for anyone but myself.
Yeah.
I guess, we've had a couple of meetings and we've been, trying to think about broad categories of some things that the schools are doing well, some things that they could be doing better, and trying to talk about how to organize, how to think about this. General categories that we've come up with in a committee, which is on this draft document, which is in the materials. We broke it out into student wellness, culture and climate, curriculum, instruction and assessment, facilities and grounds, and safety and security. These are big, broad topics. And at this point, the idea is to reach out to basically the people in the community and to try to solicit as much feedback as possible. So the members of the committee are going out and trying to make asks for people that they know. And you'll see at the bottom that there is an email address, strategicplan@sau66.org, where anyone could submit feedback on any one or more of these topics, categories, or anything else that they think is relevant. I think the idea is to try to facilitate communication between the community, the school board, and the superintendent, to try to give direction about what is important. And so we certainly wanted to make a presentation here, because everyone here is in the community and has connections with the community, and encourage everybody here to talk to the folks that share this email. Feel free to reach out to Norm, feel free to reach out to me, and to give feedback in whatever way they think would be productive. I think the overall goal is to try to give direction and facilitate communication with the community. And so I think that that's a noble goal and a good goal, because ultimately the money that's being spent is the community's. And so I think it's important to understand what we're doing well and what we could be doing better at. So again, the email at the end is strategicplan@sau66.org. And I would encourage people to encourage the people that who have children in the school or who don't, to give feedback. The more, the better.
Thank you, Jonathan. And the information that we're working on in this project will be available to the public. So the work that we're doing, people can go in there and they can see, what we've been talking about regarding SWOT analysis and stuff, things that we have been working with all together. One thing that is really important was we decided to have finance and communication be part of each one of those, because each part plays a part into each bucket. When we tried separating finance and communication, it was just a wall of text. I mean, it was a lot of information. So we're gathering this information in the next couple of weeks. We just got to figure out how to communicate this to as many stakeholders as possible. Be it with all age groups, all incomes, everyone that we can in this community to get the information. So your support is really appreciative. And as Jonathan said, we're here to help. We're going to do our best to get a voice out there and feedback from them.
One other thing, in looking at the document that was provided, there's a draft document in our materials. This appears to be an older draft, which was replaced.
Yep.
So I think it would be good if we replace those in the school budget. We replace this draft with the more.
So there was a draft that was sent earlier this morning with the packet, and then I was notified of a change in which I emailed Devin Neal. And so there should be the updated 2.0 in here.
Okay, so,
I think it was version 3, actually.
so maybe we can somehow get that, maybe we can swap that out of the materials or whatever, if they're gonna be available.
So,
Any questions about any of that?
Thank you. for
yeah,
looking on
you're
that.
very welcome. And
Anything else, Norm?
no, that's actually it. I'm excited to bring you guys a budget in January. Yeah, that's all I know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You can stay put. All right, over to you, Don, for the two quick
I
precincts.
have no new updates. Expect the finalization of the precinct budget this following Monday. So our next meeting, if we have it, the following Wednesday, I would have it. If we don't have that meeting, we'll just do it the next time.
Very good.
Don, I hope it's gonna include repair of the street light at the end of School Street.
No, it doesn't. Just to that point, there's a number that you can call, an 800 number. You personally can call them and they will come fix that.
Oh, really?
The precinct does not go out and look at all those.
Oh,
Nobody's been assigned to do that,
oh,
but the
how do I
number,
get that?
the number, you could call Sam Courier and he would give you that number. I should
Okay.
carry that number with me.
It's on the Eversource website.
Okay,
You just need the poll.
Right.
okay.
Look at that.
The
See,
the difficulty is
problem solved.
when you want to find out what light is out, you have a flashlight to get the pole number. You won't remember which one it is the next morning.
Oh, I'll remember.
All right, great. Thank you, Don. Thomas.
We also don't have any updates. We're hoping to finalize our budget in similar timeframe. If we might miss the next meeting, hopefully the one after that, we should be prepared for. However, in Hopkinton precinct, we do have somebody assigned to go look at the street poles. So in case anyone at home is wondering, you don't need to call. Got you covered.
I fancy up there.
Yeah,
It's just me on my plate.
it is nice over here. It is really.
Maybe you could train our precinct.
You can see them all if you walk out the front step, so it's not a big lift.
We've got like 5.
Okay, very good, thank you. So we don't have any members of the public here. I don't know if
I think
anybody's
we might have had a
on.
couple
Couple earlier. Okay,
Chelsea and Sabrina.
Neil, if Dulcie or Sabrina wants to comment, we can invite them and do they just raise their hands?
Raise their hand.
All right,
Can we just holler at them?
all right.
conference. and-
No, thank you. Thank you for letting us know, Dulcie. In the absence of hands, then we will close the public comment session.
Oh, wait, there was a chat.
No, chat was no comment.
Oh.
In other business to come before the board, I want to ask if folks feel the need to meet next week. Because I think we've got the school budget on the second Wednesday of January 12th. And I presume we could take up the precinct budgets that date as well. If folks are amenable, we can eliminate the need to meet next Wednesday.
What is the process as far as like talking about the town budget?
Well, we can talk about it now, and then we'll have more opportunity in January before we vote. But I think if there's things that you want to talk about, this is a good time to talk about them. Or it was 3 budget items ago, but we can talk about them more.
No, I'm just
Yeah.
trying to get a sense of it.
Yeah, so we will vote on the town budget. We're not being asked to vote on the town budget tonight.
Correct.
We will vote on it in advance of the public meeting. So we have a meeting on the, thank you, Steve. I'm not trying to be flip. We've got a meeting on January 12th, and then we had another meeting on January 19th. So my hope is that by the 19th, ideally, we will have received all the budgets, had dialogue. So we'll definitely have time on the 19th for discussion about the town budget, and we may be in a position to pull the budget committee for our endorsement back up for each of the budgets that date. The public hearing is the 9th, I think,
Yep,
right?
February 9th.
Yep, so we're good because we actually have, if for some reason we have a need for additional back and forth with either the town or the school board, we have a week or two built in there as needed. But I guess that's a long answer, and the short answer, Steve, I think is the 12th or the 19th, particularly the 19th, because the 12th, I think, will be focusing primarily on the school budget.
We might have this one meeting with the school, because we'll just crush it.
That would be awesome.
You never know.
One can always hope.
When do warrants need to be proposed by?
The petition for the town, petition warrant article deadline is February 1st this year. It needs to be posted in February, right after the public hearing. So the board select the governing body should have their stuff done this year.
Very good.
I encourage you guys to watch our meeting if you want to hear more about the budget between now and January.
Great.
When is the next meeting on?
December 21st. We will have everything.
That's at Maple Street?
That should be the plague. If it changes, I'll let you know. They have the plague going on, so.
Oh,
And the next select board meeting is the 20th, Ken?
I think 12 days.
The 20th.
Okay. Any other business tonight?
When is our next meeting?
So our next meeting will be on January 12th. We get a month break before we amp it up in the month of January. Please hold the 12th and the 19th. And hopefully that's all we will need. But if we need the 26th, we will decide that on the 19th. All right, we'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'll make it.
All in favor? Thank you and happy holidays.